MHKs Michelle Haywood and Anne Corlett have recently returned from the annual Commonwealth Women's Parliamentary Conference. It's a sad reflection of the world we live in that it is still felt necessary to hold such events, but, unlike the Isle of Man, most parliaments around the world continue to be male-dominated. Amy Griffiths caught up with the two MHKs to find out why women continue to struggle to get equal representation in Parliament.
So it's held yearly in different places around the Commonwealth. And this year, Belfast did it. They've been trying to do it for many years, actually, but they haven't had a parliament. So now they're back, reinstated. It was an ideal opportunity for them to do it.
And of course, you get to interact with lots of different jurisdictions around the world. And so historically on the Isle of Man, I mean, albeit this administration, we've got one of the best distributions of sort of men to women that the island has ever had. But it's still been a battle to get more women in politics here. And is that something that other jurisdictions have also seen as well from the people that you were having conversations with?
I think actually we're in a good place compared to almost all of the jurisdictions that were at this conference. Yeah. And they're seeing a drop in numbers, women members in particular not standing. I always feel quite good when you go to anything like this because our parliament is actually pretty much...
And LegCo as well. So on balance, Tynwald is very gender balanced. And I think it's only Iceland, is it, that reaches that same level of gender balance. Yeah. So we're ahead of the rest of the Commonwealth and the world, I think, in terms of balance.
But that could all very much change at the next election. It's not a sustainable thing unless we help it to be sustainable.
And what does help it be sustainable? What can encourage more women into this realm, which has historically been a boys' club? It always has been, and that's, I think, a lot of people still perceive it that way. So is there a way of being able to break down that stigma and show that it is a more accessible place?
I think the last election probably showed some of that. In fact, if you look at the number of women candidates for the last election, they were more likely to get elected than there was significant more male candidates, and
proportionally,
proportionally.
The number of women that stood, the ones that were elected were in proportion. So.
Yeah, and
it's a case of getting people to stand.
It's different motivations, though, isn't it? I think by and large, research will tell us that men stand for political positions mostly because they want the position and they want the title, and whereas women are much more motivated by I think I can do some good here and I think I can achieve something, and it's about that kind of almost vocational sort of public service ethos coming through that you think you can step forward and try and make a difference on behalf of your community.
And I suppose it's one of those things as well that we can't ignore the fact that a lot of the time women are the mothers of the family, and so they quite often have the childcare responsibilities that, again, I think strides have been taken in this, but it is still kind of seen that actually because being a politician, it takes up an awful lot of your time, and it's very unsociable hours. A lot of your events are in the evening or they're during the day, and so you can't necessarily work a family life around it as easily necessarily. I mean, is that potentially something that's also a hurdle?
I think that's pretty much recognised, really, that women do pick up more of the caring responsibilities perhaps than men do. And it's not just young families, it's parents, caring for parents. There's a lot of things that kind of women pick up probably more than men.
And we have made changes in this administration, haven't we? We've changed the sitting time so that Tynwald concludes now at 6:30 rather than running on till 8. And when you used to look at the debates that happened after 6:30, and the quality of the debate and the discussion noticeably drops as people are getting tired as you've got through the day. Concentrating and actively listening to discussions in Tynwald is hard work, and so forcing people on to work on in the evenings, and then they get to sort of 8 o'clock and they decide to carry on till 10. And previous members have told me, proudly we've carried on until we've been till 10 o'clock, 10:30, nearly midnight, trying to get stuff through. And that is not a way to do good decision making. Any parent of any toddler will tell you your brains are starting to switch off once it gets close to bedtime, and that applies to adults as much as it does children. So that move, I think, which was billed as a kind of more family-friendly move, and the talk of changing sitting dates, so we kind of avoided holidays a little bit more. But then inherently in the building the seats are designed for men. They're designed for people much taller than us. You can't sit on one of those seats in Tynwald forward enough to reach the desk and lean back at the same time. You just haven't got the support because the seats are so deep. You either sit back, and in my case my feet are off the floor then, or I have to sit forward and not lean back at all. And so you'll see a variety of the women taking cushions and all sorts of things with them just to make it comfortable to be there. So we've designed a whole sort of culture and setup around men because that's essentially who was in there, and it takes time to unpick that and to make it so that it doesn't disadvantage women.
That's the case for many parliaments around the world, really, and it's very difficult, isn't it, because that's the traditional setting. We've got beautiful chambers. Do we want to modernise it? Do we want to change it? But I have to say the seats are uncomfortable.
But the thing is, though, it's basic things like that really do make an impact and don't make you feel welcomed into the space, I think, isn't it? If you're sitting somewhere in a seat that's just clearly designed for someone that's not for you, and you're having to spend quite a significant amount of time sitting in those chairs. I mean, even funnily, we went to St John's Church, and the seats in there are awful. But again, like a very similar thing there, where it's not necessarily designed to be a welcoming space for women ultimately, or for anybody that's not a man.
I think if you look at the Tynwald space particularly, it wasn't designed to be a parliamentary chamber, was it? I mean, it's well known that everyone starts getting headaches somewhere in the afternoon. The lighting is poor in there, the ventilation is poor. It's not a good working environment, and yet justifying spending funds on that is really hard to do, and it change is difficult, and people, you said we look at it and it has this iconic traditional design.
Would you want to change that? But perhaps there are ways to do that, to make it a little bit more person friendly without actually destroying the tradition in the chamber.
Yeah.
And I think whether it's the fabric of the building or whether it's the culture, that drive for change has to come from the leadership, and it has to come from things like, and we spoke about this in Belfast, that when gendered language is used in the chamber, that actually our presiding officers are really hot on calling it out and assisting that, because that doesn't have a place within a modern parliament.
Even, one quite infamous quote now, the shrill voice of socialism.
The shrill voice, yes. Never said about a man, was it?
No. And that's it. And then that's the thing. And that is just the reality of the situation, is that wouldn't be used to describe a man.
No, and it's absolutely right. That would never be used to describe a man. And I think it's those bits that creep through. And in fact, you can look back over the years, and we know, we've seen the research from UCM, haven't we, about how you have somebody saying, well, you obviously need to get back home and do the dinner, and to a fellow member, and obviously you've got childcare responsibilities. It's a demeaning language that comes through that is basically just a very, very thinly disguised misogyny in its own right. But the only way that happens is with leadership from the top to say that this culture is unacceptable. And it's not even just women. It's anyone with any perceived marginal kind of group within Parliament, that actually Parliament should be welcoming to all delegates. And unless you see that from the outside, unless you see that that's how you're treated, is that you're treated on your merits, and you're treated on your standards and your integrity and your honesty and your trustworthiness, unless that comes through in the debate from the outside, you say, then, well, why would I want to walk into that? Women in a professional setting particularly are used to an environment where that's not tolerated. Somehow we feel it's okay to tolerate that in Parliament, and I don't think it is. I disagree.
And somewhere else where this is particularly prevalent is on social media, and you both are probably quite well placed to have a conversation about this, because one of you, Michelle, is quite active on social media, whereas Anne, you are not as active on social media.
I'm
Do you
not
actually have
active at all.
Exactly? You don't have a.
I don't have a social media presence.
So how does that impact how you both carry out your politics today in 2026?
I think Anne's well-being is probably much better than mine.
It is, without a doubt. I think it is. It's distracting. We talked earlier about having time to monitor social media and to respond to social media. I would find that very difficult, and My way of working is to talk to you. So I'd rather a phone call or meet up or even email. But for me, and I am very odd in there because I think I'm probably the only person who doesn't do social media.
But then do you find that impacts you as well? Because you do then see people, I mean, well, you won't see it, but I then see people commenting and saying, oh, I've never heard of this woman before. Where's she been?
Yes.
Because you don't have that online presence.
Yeah. And that, that is difficult. And that's the trade-off, isn't it?
That's more a reflection, though, of those commentators not taking any other source of information other than what they see on social media, because you do appear in all sorts of press releases, you appear in all sorts of departmental things, you speak out in the chamber,
various committees and
committees. You'll come on Manx Radio and talk. All of those things do happen, and you are clearly there, and you are clearly an active member of the Parliament. And if people are commenting and saying, who is she? I don't know. Well, shame on them, because they're obviously not looking at a variety of sources that are available to them.
This makes me so happy, because this is just women empowering women right here, isn't it? In action, in front of us. And it's great to see.
And we all have different ways of working, and that's really important too. But it is important that we support each other in the different ways that we approach this.
And that was one of the outcomes from the conference in Belfast, wasn't it? It was the launch of the mentoring scheme for women who are coming into politics, new in politics, or already established in politics. And I sat there and listened to the launch, and I was going, oh no, I can't do that. I've been in national politics now for 4.5 years. I don't know, I don't feel. And I think you gave me a bit of a talking to, didn't you?
Yeah.
Of course you can do this, And it's a typical sort of female trait, I think, is to step back and go, oh no, I don't think, and to question yourself and to have that
imposter
that problem.
syndrome. It's a real thing. It's a real thing,
really
and so many
is.
women I speak to, myself included, experience it and are constantly question even things like I'll be writing an email, go, oh, sorry to bother you, I'm just wanting to, and just putting in all of these little things that almost diminish, like trying to be as little of a bother as possible to try and have a place in the space that you're in. And it can really be challenging, and it is something that it maybe sounds a bit sort of whatever to talk about, but actually it is a really common problem for so many women in the working world, wherever part of the world you're working in, whatever industry you're in, including politics.
And the only real antidote I found to that is actually the support of other strong women around you. It's women, and I was really grateful. I wasn't grateful at all when I was sacked as minister, but I was really grateful to those strong women who I've known throughout my time here on the island, so over 20 years, and some of them completely not political contacts, who contacted me in the immediate aftermath and said, right, come down, let's have a chat, let's have a coffee, here's some cake, etc., etc., let's talk this through, and offered their support. And you think, it was lovely for me to find out that all these people that I knew cared enough and could see the value in reaching out and having those discussions with me and offering that support. And I was thinking, actually, no, and it's a similar thing to I've done to other people in a similar situation, that you reach out. And I think there is a level of engagement in our societies, especially with women who are in positions of company directors or managerial positions or in politics, where there is almost like a little network that runs there that does offer that support that you'll have built up over time. And I'm really grateful to all those women who sort of stepped forward, really excellent women in their own fields, who kind of stepped forward and said, right, come on, girl,
But do you think that in itself is maybe one of the hurdles for women getting into particularly politics? Because I think politics particularly is one of those jobs where you have to have a really thick skin, and you have to be able to take a lot of flack, but it's not necessarily one where you get a huge amount of support. I mean, particularly here on the Isle of Man, when we don't have a party system in the same way as you do in the UK. So the MHKs are individuals for the most part within, and while you might have the people that you sort of naturally align with more and whatever, but actually you don't necessarily have that circle of reassurance and people building you up all the time and saying, oh, you know what, you did that, like that speech was brilliant, I really enjoyed what you said there, or this was an excellent policy that you've put forward, or anything like that? Do you think that's maybe sometimes because we do, I'm speaking as a wide generalisation, but from my own experience as well, we need a bit of that. We need a bit of that encouragement to go, is what I'm doing okay? And do you think that's something that is potentially a bit of a hurdle?
I think it's quite common for women, isn't it, to be very self-reflective and very self-critical.
Yeah, we're our own worst critics.
Yeah, we are our own worst critics, and I think it's indicative of a level of intelligent interrogation of what you're doing, that you kind of almost you look back on it, and I think a lot of women have to actively work to overcome that barrier. And I surprised myself the other day, something I've been putting off for about a month, thinking it's really difficult, I'm not going to do it, and I nailed it in an hour and a half, and I was really impressed with myself, and I came out and I thought, why did I think that was going to be so tough? And I have to remind myself of those lessons, because otherwise you would let that hold you back. And I think particularly within politics, actually what you need is women to speak out and to say, it's okay. I still walk in, after 4.5 years, I still walk into the building and go, I'm here. That imposter syndrome never goes away. One of the other female members mentioned it today, didn't she? That it never goes away, because we are always incredibly grateful for where we are, and we know that it's with the consent of our constituents that we're there representing them.
That humility is really important to retain that throughout your time in politics, I think, because if you lose that, well, it's a kind of arrogance taking over, isn't it?
And you're there to represent the voices of the people who've elected you ultimately. And so, yes, they elect you on the basis of, you put forward, this is what I believe in, this is what I stand for, and this is what I want to achieve. That's what you put out there, and that's why people then vote for you. But then you have to follow through with that, and and they hold you to a high standard to do that, and you really do get called out if you haven't followed through in those promises that you've made in an election. And I think it's important. I think sometimes it's easy to forget that it's your voters that put you there. And I think some politicians do that. And I think it's really important to always have that at the forefront of your mind, isn't it? And do you find the same? Do you find that you get your constituents going, oh well, you said this and you haven't done it yet? And
yeah, but I think we all have to understand you can't do anything on your own.
No.
You need the majority of members to come along with anything that you're trying to do.
And that's the strength of having women in politics, because women, by their very nature, are more collegiate about how they work, and they are more likely to build that consensus and to work through complicated problems to get to an acceptable solution to everyone. I think the big mistake that I find in people, you said, you represent your constituents' voices, but if I go and talk to 1,000 people in my constituency, they won't all say the same thing. And actually, you can't keep everyone happy. And trying to explain to people that just because you've told me your perception of that doesn't mean that that's actually what I'm going to do, because I have to balance that out against, and I got criticism for this one, the silent voices, but it's those that don't have the voice to speak. So it's children and the rights of babies and children and young people who aren't on social media and won't come to a political meeting. It's the elderly or people who don't use social media, who actually have a huge amount to say and have separate interests. And so judging just by one particular thread on social media what people think is really dangerous, and expecting me to do that because you're my constituent and you've said, well, I think you should be able to drive on the other side of the road on Thursdays, and that's why aren't you doing that? Well, clearly that's not in everyone's greatest interest, and my job is actually to balance out all of those interests and to look for the ones that aren't necessarily saying things and think, well, what's in their best interests? And so you're coming to a really complicated decision-making process to get to what you move forward with.
Absolutely, and I think that's where social media is not always to your advantage, because it's distorting numbers, really. You're hearing things very loudly on social media, but it's not from a lot of voices. And I think you do, it's not a consultation process, social media, is it? It's just people usually actually at one end of the scale or the other. And there's a huge silent majority that's totally not captured in that. Yeah, and the only way you can listen to those people is to go out and talk to them, knock on doors.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that they don't particularly care. They're a bit agnostic about what you're going to do anyway. Or it was so bleeding obvious what you'd said you were going to do that they're just expecting you to get on with it. And so they don't feel the need to engage and argue about it because you've said you're going to do something. So, move on and get it done and deliver it.
Yeah. But it's how you come to that decision that you are going to support something or you are going to do something. You get that from the people you represent. And the only way you can sort of represent the majority is actually by speaking to them. And you're never going to do that on social media.
Mm. And I suppose, Michelle, I'm going to direct this at you predominantly because you have a presence online and on social media. But how much of the negative rhetoric you get online would you class as potentially being misogynistic? And as part of that, how much of an impact does that have on you wanting to continue within politics and wanting to continue doing what you're doing when you have to put up with that kind of noise?
I did make a post about this recently when I spoke about the impact that it has on women thinking about standing in politics, and whether they're put off by that, and that those comments are made by people that we know. I know there's some of those comments are made by people I will walk past in the high street in Portsmouth, or I'll walk into Tesco's in Port Erin and I'll be walking down the aisle and they'll be walking the other way, and you think, well, you've just said awful things about me. But actually I know from people I've been talking to that they make judgments about those people that make those negative, horrible comments as well. And I think you're almost seeing that kind of split. There's a lot of silent lurkers on Facebook who'll read it, and trust me, they are making judgments about people who say really horrible things. I think when some of those comments were picked up, and I curate my own Facebook page, but it's not curated elsewhere, and so you only had to start reading through some of those, and you could see the blatant misogyny shining through. I kind of turned out, Hillary Clinton made a comment about, if you hear criticism, that's fine, but evaluate the criticism, see if anything's real in terms of what you need to deal with, and if it isn't, just let it wash off you. You can't, and I'm not sure I even agree that you have to have a particularly thick skin, because I don't want to lose the ability to connect with people, and I don't want to lose that empathy. In fact, that's one of the things that I think I bring to the table, is that ability to connect with people, and I don't want to have a complete thick skin that means I ignore all of those comments.
No, and I don't think most politicians have. I mean, this stuff hurts. It really does hurt when people are saying, awful things about you,
And yet if I say that's hurtful, what do you get back? You get, oh, you're just claiming to be a victim again. Look at you, always playing the victim card. And it's demeaning and it's belittling. And it's just by its very nature. Somebody put on one of my posts, if there was any misogynist comments, and I haven't seen any. Oh, well, you've just belittled me with the whole thing. You've just dismissed the post I was making.
That as women, we're more likely to take it personally than a man would, which, maybe to a certain extent we are. But then also actually maybe we're there holding up a mirror and going, just because we're holding up a mirror to your actions and you don't like what you see in it, that's not our fault and not our problem. Is something as well. And I think that it's the same with any kind of minority, is that you can't speak for the person's lived experience if you haven't lived it. And so just because you might not necessarily, if you're a man, see that as misogyny, you don't have the context that I have as a woman to be able to see that as what it is and to see the undertones to it. And I think it's a dangerous road to go down to try and assume that what someone else's experience is.
Yeah, and I mean, the other you get various things that get thrown around. And I particularly like it when people go, "Oh, you're just woke lefty politician." I was like, woke meaning I'm alive to other people's perspectives, other people's experiences. I'm sympathetic to other people's lives and how that impacts, how these decisions impact on them. I'm going to take woke all the time. I don't want to be. What's the opposite? An ignorant person who just wants to ignore everyone around them and assume that only their lived experience is the valid one. Well, that's not where I want to be at all, because I absolutely know, my experience is not the only experience of life, and I hope from my sort of varied background as I've gone through life, that I can bring all of those connections that I have with other people into bear on the decisions that I'm making. And you don't want to be isolated from and just into one mode of thinking. But I think it does separate quite a lot on gender lines.
But do you not think too that, trying to have a debate or a discussion online builds frustration? you don't have the ability to talk face to face. There's no kind of narrative around what you're saying. There's no body language. You can't look someone in the eye and, is this a genuine comment?
You can't hear the tone in which someone's saying something.
Yeah, there's no nuance.
And
none of that.
If I said something to you and you looked a bit, then I would take care to think you've taken that the wrong way.
And go, oh, sorry, I didn't mean it like that. What I meant is blah, blah, blah. And
there's no opportunity to do that online. It's just words on a page.
It's really true. And I think it's something that people don't recognise enough, and they don't... And I think there is, and it's something that's said all the time, but people don't necessarily write something on social media in the way that they would say it to somebody's face. It's usually much more blunt. It's usually much more... it can be much more aggressive or seem much more aggressive because, and actually sitting down with a person, immediately your natural ability to converse with somebody kicks in, doesn't it? And sort of our British manners and politeness. And
interestingly, on social media, I mean, I've offered now nearly 50 times. I've said to people, would you like to, let's get some time, let's have a cup of coffee, let's sit down and discuss this. And out of those nearly 50 times, I've had 5 cups of coffee.
Really?
With people. Yeah. So over, I mean, this is spread over years and stuff like that. But I get to the point of saying, come in and talk to me. Come in and talk to me. Would you like to come in? And often that just stops the conversation dead. They're just like,
really? Yeah.
And I think it's almost symptomatic of like lack of critical thinking that goes on into social media posts. People, the one that really irritates me is somebody posting up a clown emoji. Well, you know what? If you think that your ideas and your analysis of the situation are so cutting edge and so spot on, put them into words. You are not a toddler. Don't just give me a picture. Stand. Let's discuss it at Hustings. But put them into words. Articulate. Like you say it to 2-year-olds, don't you? Use your words.
I say that to my toddler all the time.
Yeah, exactly. But why should I have middle-aged men? They are middle-aged men posting pictures and emojis, and you're like, what are you trying to achieve here? Nothing other than you think you're being cutting edge and funny, and you're not. You're just being puerile.
You're right, but that's how. Social media and electronic communication has developed. We've cut it down to now we're emojiing. And, I even went on an email, I'll read it a couple of times before I send it. And even then, sometimes I'll put a smiley face on just in case you've got the wrong idea. I mean, it's really hard. And But
then again, a man wouldn't do that, as we were talking about before. A man wouldn't feel the need to do that. But we as women do feel the need to do that. And it's such an interesting comparison, I find, seeing the difference between if you got a man and a woman to send the same email to the same person about the same topic, they would be wildly different emails.
There was a really interesting example that we were discussing at the conference about 2 football commentators, one female and one male, who swapped social media accounts. And they agreed they were posting pretty much the same commentary about a particular match. The male presenter didn't believe that anything would happen, and the female presenter absolutely knew what she was getting into, because he suddenly started getting on his social media account. He was getting a great analysis, fantastic, and her social media account was getting the get back to the kitchen, stick to the cooking, go home and look after the kids sort of. And yet he'd been posting those posts, and he'd been writing the post onto her account. And I think there is that almost built-in factor now in social media, particularly, that if you think it's a woman commentating, there will be this pile-on effect. And I know that friends of mine who've changed their names to something that's ambiguous and ambivalent, and you can't immediately tell the gender, in order to step away from just getting that completely sexist comments directed at you.
And I feel like we have spoken a lot about the negative side of things today, but I guess we do have a general election coming up in 6 months now. And what would you say to any, particularly women, but I suppose any marginalised part of society who is considering standing for election, or isn't considering standing for election, but thinks that they have a few ideas that might encourage them to? What advice would you give to them about what it is like to be a politician, and particularly here on the Isle of Man?
For me, it's the best job I've ever had, honestly. There are negatives, absolutely, but oh my word, it's an amazing job, and it's such an honour to have it. And I always think, you've got to keep yourself going sometimes with the small achievements, because the big things are hard to get. I always think, I know I'm not going to change the world, but I can change somebody's world, and that's what keeps you going. And I would absolutely encourage anyone who's thinking about it to go for it, because you can do so much more than you think you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It's those small wins. I look for a win every week, even if it is just one constituent that I've helped signpost to one bit of help, and I get the email back saying sort of thanks for that, and we're all sorting out. So even those bits, you have to hold on to those. But I think there have never been any 2 days that are the same in this job. The intellectual challenge, and I don't think there's anything that would absolutely prepare you to walk in as a member of Tynwald. You can't be an expert and be across everything. So the kind of the skills that underpin the ability to read and understand the volumes of information that you're given, and to critically think about it, and to ask the right questions of officers if you're in a department, and to ask the right questions of ministers if you're not, the ability to see through things, and to really think about consequences, and that sort of, I'm making it sound very dry and academic, but it's not. It's actually, it's so stimulating, because it forces you into learning about topics that you'd never really experienced. And so, particularly if you're the sort of person that can do that, and that you like the idea of being able to pick apart those complex issues and to make progress. And you're right, technically we'll never change the world. We will change bits of the world. We will make a difference along the way, and some of those steps will be terribly tiny baby steps. I didn't set out.
Everyone's an accomplishment.
Yeah, I didn't set out to change child benefit rates, for example, but the Population Rebalancing Committee met, and actually one of the things we thought was a disadvantage for families was that the second and subsequent children got lower rates, and so we made the recommendation, and it got picked up, and it's gone through. So actually, for all those families for the last 3 years, they've all had the benefit of having that extra payment out, and it was never in my manifesto. It was something that came along at the time, and I saw the chance to do something good.
Most of what you do, and most of what you achieve, and most of it you don't get any credit for, because you've been in the development of something. But most of the things that you feel are your best achievements are probably not in your manifesto. They're things that you've been able to be a part of achieving. And that's what makes the job so special, really.
And I suppose this year as well, for the first time, the way that the Chief Minister is selected is changing. And do you think that could have an impact? I mean, could we have a woman as the Chief Minister on the Isle of Man for the first time, do you think?
It's about time, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible.
If either of you are re-elected, would either of you throw your hats in the ring?
So like the $1 million question, is that you have to be re-elected first.
Yeah.
It's a leadership role. We could do leadership, either of us.
Yeah.
We're doing International Women's Day, and we've got a really good event coming up in Tynwald with 5 secondary schools taking part in a debating session in Tynwald Chamber, and they've each chosen a motion to put forward, and it's very. It's female topics and things that the students feel strongly about. I think it's going to be I think actually Manx Radio might be coming along to it.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
I just think it's really important to get younger people involved in this too.
Just in politics in general, because it's such an underutilised demographic. Because, I mean, I know certainly when I grew up here, I didn't even know the Isle of Man had a Chief Minister. I literally had no idea about Manx politics at all. And it was only when I started working here yonks ago that I started to understand the Manx political system more, and how wide and varied it was too, and how many opportunities there are within it. And I think actually if you're showing that to children from a younger age and getting them involved in it and doing things like that, that's where you inspire the youth and get them engaged and get them telling their friends to go and vote, to get them standing for election as well, and all of that. But it's only by that active engagement, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think one of the things that women are particularly good is empowering others. So good women leaders, and once you're elected, and you are a leader of your community, but good women leaders are all about empowering others and bringing out the best in others. And because we're not feeding our own egos in what we do, it's actually it's almost like a beauty of it, isn't it? Is mentoring or coaching somebody to come forward. And if there are any women who are considering standing, approach either myself or Anne and have a chat about it, and let us talk to you about some of the pitfalls and the ways of keeping yourself safe while you're campaigning, but also some of the joys of the job, because it is a job with a real purpose, isn't it? And there's a real sense of fulfilment that comes from getting through each day.
But it's probably quite easy to get bogged down with the negative as well.
I try not to.
Yeah.
No, actually, there's positives. I honestly believe there's more positives in my day than negatives.
Yeah. And I think you have that boundary around you, don't you? You have your close support group. I know I've talked about the women that came forward and supported me, but you have those people around you that support you, and you ground yourself back with them each time. And so what happens outside of that boundary, you kind of set that aside and it's like, yeah, I've heard you, but it's noise. It's not... It's not based in fact, it's not true, and it's actually, I'm not going to let it deter me, because actually it's like being bullied, and I don't want to be bullied. I don't want to make decisions because I'm afraid of what the critics are going to say on Facebook, because that's not a way to make policies.
And we should also celebrate the role that the men around us do have in this, because certainly last administration there were fewer women. And all the help I was receiving was from the male members, and they were really good. Taught me lots of things, suggested ways of doing things. So there's, it's not just about women.
A lot of it is what you make of it as well, isn't it? And if you are somebody who is genuine, who is honest, who is quite clearly just trying to do their best, people respond to that, whether anybody responds to that, men, women, whoever respond. And so actually sometimes you have to be what you put out into the world, what you want to get back, don't you, to a certain extent. And I think actually sometimes that's all we can do as human beings, isn't it, is just try and do our best. But for the most part, people respond to that, and they can see that, and they want to actively then help and encourage that too.
Yeah. And to achieve anything, as a woman, you need the support of men as much as you do women.
We need our allies.
We absolutely do. And we have plenty of them.
That was MHK's Michelle Haywood and Anne Corlett talking to Amy Griffiths. So what do you think? Are women unfairly targeted in social media just because they are women? And how have the women fared in this more equal House of Keys? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com, and please get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget, this programme is available as a podcast. For now, I'm Phil Gorn. Guramayo Sungaisteach Rum. Thanks for listening.